Good afternoon and welcome to today's Digital Construction Events webinar in association with the National Federation of Roofing Contractors and Bauder. Today's webinar is on improving competence and construction quality, and the session is due to last around an hour up until 3 o'clock this afternoon. We have three speakers for you today: Richard Miller, who's Head of Quality and Compliance at the NFRC, Nigel Blacklock, Technical Director at Bauder, and Alan McIntosh, Facade Engineer at Arup. Just to introduce myself, my name is Neil Gerard from Digital Construction Events, and I'll be chairing the session today. So just to give you a quick overview of what we're going to be discussing in the webinar today, we're going to be looking at demonstrating and revalidating competency in construction and what the future is going to hold. We're also going to be examining what the Code for Construction Products Information is, and that's rather timely because it's just been officially launched today. And we're going to be hearing about Arup's role on the Borough Collection in Glasgow and Lloyd of London projects, looking at how Arup met quality and compliance requirements. Each of those sessions should last around 15 minutes, and then once they've concluded, we'll have time hopefully at the end for a Q&A session. Now you can use the Q&A function within Zoom to ask your questions during the presentation, and the panel will try to answer those questions using that function during the webinar, and then any unanswered questions that we have will be addressed by the panel after the presentations have concluded. And just to let you know that the webinar today will be available on demand, so you can rewatch it at your leisure. So I'm just about to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to pass over to Richard. So just let me turn this off. Richard, if you'd like to start sharing your screen, we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thanks, Neil. Can you just confirm that we are on full screen mode now?
We're on full screen. I can hear you fine, thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rach. Well, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Richard Miller. I'm the Head of Quality and Compliance here at the National Federation of Roofing Contractors and a representative of Working Group 2 and a member of the Construction Leadership Council's Competence Committee. Today, I shall be gathering together some of the thoughts, recommendations and views from Working Group 2, competence committees, industry, and through my own experience in relation to installer competence. I do hope you find the information provided you today to be informative. So throughout this presentation today, I'm going to be covering some of the thoughts and work to date that is currently in circulation through a variety of published documents, working groups and committees, looking to pull together some of the key thoughts and potential requirements for the future. We will highlight the bigger picture and look at some of the available information circulated and publicly available. I cannot cover everything in the next 15 minutes and would therefore recommend you all to read through these as you find appropriate. We will take a view at what we mean by organisational competence in the context of this work and take a look into installer competence from a Working Group 2 perspective and exactly what this may mean for the future. I will conclude with discussing my thoughts on infrastructure to deliver competence for the future and provide a small case study of what we've been doing in the roofing industry to drive revalidation of competence. Looking then first of all at the bigger picture and summarising from the reports and work streams identified on the screen. There is a clear message around overall competence of those involved with all aspects of building, which at the time of publication related to in the main in high-rise residential buildings. But as we've now moved on, discussions regarding competency have continued to shift to high-risk buildings and across all building works within the built environment. During this presentation, I will be focusing on competence requirements of organisations, but primarily of that of installers. As you may be aware, in May 2018, Building a Safer Future report was completed and published, authored by Dame Judith Hackett. Contained within this report was a series of recommendations and a call to arms for industry, with the findings of this report being accepted by government. Our focus for this session is based around Chapter 5 of that report on competence. This then led to a series of work streams and committees being orchestrated in response to the recommendations provided. The Competence Steering Group, CSG, was formed along with 13 working groups to support work related to the recommendations. Whilst competence is a broad subject and relevant to all aspects of construction design, the focus today, as previously mentioned, is on installer competence, that from Working Group 2, and some of the work that we have completed to date. Under the guidance of the CSG, the working groups provided detailed information, which led to the completion of 2 further reports. First, the interim report raising the bar, followed secondly by setting the bar, which was published in October of 2020. Within this report, recommendation 1 in working group 2 installer section contain the following, and very important for the rest of this presentation: that the industry should adopt a framework for all installer sectors working on in-scope buildings that can be applied to other project types. It goes on to recommend that this framework will consist of accredited third-party certification of companies, that level 2 or 3 qualifications will be relevant for individuals, that a card scheme, CPD refresher training, and crucially, maintenance of individual skills is in place, and that all installers have a core knowledge of fire safety in buildings. And importantly, that this training was to be standardised and made mandatory. Further recommendation also extends to state where installer sectors do not currently operate within recommendation 1. These would need to be defined and developed, which leads us on to the rest of this presentation. Just to note, the main role of working group 2 is to look at the competence requirements for those installers installing safety critical systems and to support future recommendations on how this can be achieved. Working Group 2 has representation from across construction and fire sectors, with several members meeting regularly to continue the piloting and evidence gathering process. We also have the chair of the Interim Competence Committee sitting with us, support from the CLC, and representation from HSE in attendance on a regular basis. So, focusing on organisational requirements first, presented here is by no means an exhaustive list, but is an indication of how proof of organisational competence can be achieved using current and future assurance or certification processes. Whilst there are a range of current methods utilised across construction to measure this, there are thoughts given to how some of those additional methods can be more structured and formalised as a recognised route to support compliance now and in the future. It is worth noting at this point that in this context, organisational competence is deemed as having the ability to carry out the functions required in line with key principles and measured standards. Some of this criteria relates to the proof and assurance of the following: how the organisation carrying out the works ensures competency of individuals, including reassessment and revalidation of competence. This includes CPD arrangements. Assurance that product installation works are installed in line with current regulations, industry codes of practice, and to manufacturer's specifications. Meeting criteria relating to the financial stability of the business and insurance requirements. And that the organisation operates in line with recognised quality management standards. Other assurances relate to operational process, for example, how complaints are handled and resolved, and how conflicts of interest are mitigated and recorded, and how through this process impartiality can be achieved. Competent person schemes are one way in which organisational competence is currently achieved. In the roofing sector, for example, we have NFRC CPS. The scheme carries out robust auditing of all certified businesses to ensure that full scheme requirements are met in relation to installation of roofing works. The scheme is then governed by UCAS, the United Kingdom Accreditation Services, which demonstrates compliance in line with ISO 17065, which is a conformity assessment and in line with regulations. The scheme have associated mandatory technical competence requirements of installers, and work this year continues in updating those. There are a number of competent person schemes in operation across industry, but still this only captures overall a small percentage of current installation activity. As we highlighted earlier on, one of the key recommendations from setting the bar report recommends third-party certification of organisations operating in high-risk buildings. This means there are substantial amounts of occupational areas currently not covered by such requirements. Working Group 2, with support from key industry bodies, are continuing to work in this area through a three-stage approach to help support industry in achievement of third-party certification or assurance, and are currently exploring with subsector committee groups ways in which this can be achieved. We are currently running several pilots with some key occupational areas, and will be compiling a series of reports on current gaps and future requirements in due course. Whilst there are some well-known standards already in circulation that can support organisational competence through the service it offers, there remains a challenge from a cost, time and resource perspective in development and implementation across the construction sector. Therefore, Working Group 2 will explore additional ways which this can be adopted to support measuring the assurance required, taking views from the construction industry and committee groups. Installer competence remains a topic of debate across a number of industry groups, committees and the construction industry, with common themes relating to current achievement levels to demonstrate competence, infrastructure to deliver the skills required, CPD development, timeframes to implement, the costs of course associated with upskilling, training and assessment delivery, the methods used and both the quality and content of the overall facilitation. Over the next couple of slides, I want to point out some of the current and potential future requirements to support framework development that include revalidation of competence over time. The outlook I will present on the next slide on the future of competency is taken from the work contained within Working Group 2. This is the implementation phase, which we are now piloting. I will point out that this is not an exhaustive list of current methods of competence assessment, and other occupational areas will have alternative routes to demonstrate compliance. As we are all very much aware, there are already assessment methods in place in the main for vocational achievement to ascertain levels of competence across the built environment. National and Scottish Vocational Achievement has for years provided a level of assurance in relation to competency levels of installers on construction sites up and down the country. And there is little to suggest that this current mechanism will not continue to provide that source of assurance now and in the future. The vast majority of vocational qualifications have been developed with use of national occupational standards, and the format is linked directly to observational work by qualified and competent assessors. Vocational achievement through qualifications can support those currently working in the sector to demonstrate competence over a shorter period of time, depending on experience and the ability to gather evidence from the workplace in line with qualification requirements. Apprenticeships continue to be a focus point in attracting and supporting the development of new talent into our industry. Apprenticeships recently have gone through a variety of change in the last few years with the introduction of the new Trailblazer standards. However, overall, in some key areas of our sector, apprenticeship uptake has declined at a time when additional tradespeople are in increased demand, a concern that will only worsen over the years with those due to exit through retirement, natural churn, and migration of workers. Support from across the supply chain is required to increase levels of new entrants entering construction. There has also been an increase in industry sectors developing experienced worker routes to support demonstration of occupational specific competencies linked again to industry approved standards. Manufacturers training on specific products also remains an important part of upskilling and adds additional layers of assurance when installing their products, and I personally view manufacturers training as having a key role to play now and in the future to support continued upskilling, refreshment and revalidation of skills and knowledge. There is a clear drive to see occupational specific technical, fire and behavioural training implemented through upskilling of the workforce to become a feature amongst those currently installing across construction, something which the BSI Flex series documentation will drive in the development of all occupational competence frameworks. Working Group 2 continues to link its outputs to the BSI Flex documentation and the push for revalidation of knowledge, skills and behavioural competencies. There is one question finally I would like to ask the group, which can be contentious at times. Does qualified mean competent, and is there sometimes confusion between the two? Now breaking down recommendation 1 from the Setting the Bar report and development of an industry adopted framework or key set of principles, the following elements would be required by each subsector to be agreed and developed where required to progress installer and organisational competence. The lighter orange element on the top left of the screen represents organisational competence as defined in Working Group 2's key principles documentation, and there are currently 2 routes, and there is more we wish to explore with industry to demonstrate the competency levels of organisations involved in works related to high-risk buildings to provide an evidence base. One route is through third-party certification by UCAS, that's United Kingdom Accreditation Services, and the second route relates to third-party assurance aligned to key criteria. Again, this is currently detailed in the key principles documentation that is currently being developed and explored by Working Group 2. It is important to note that revalidation of organisational competence in line with the approved criteria or standards is also required. There will be more on this over the coming months through conclusion of phase 1 of Working Group 2's implementation pilot and movement into phase 2, which is then the development stage. Please also note there remains a lot of ongoing discussions and work related to how organisational competence will be delivered and monitored in the future across other groups, representatives and committees, and work continues to ensure communication and collaboration remains ongoing to avoid unnecessary confusion. The darker elements then all refer to installer competence. It is therefore visualised that for each subsector is to decide on what is either currently available or not, its fitness for purpose, and most importantly, the content required to ensure the competence requirements of installer roles remain suitable and both achievable. There is no doubt that some occupational areas will have developmental work to get to the level required to demonstrate full compliance in line with the proposed framework and principles to which Working Group 2 have developed in line with the BSI Flex and other recommendations. However, the current pilot work across a variety of subsectors will support Working Group 2 in development of a blueprint to which other subsectors can develop competence requirements. These committee groups and the work being piloted to date will help support the rest of construction in its development of competency frameworks by sharing best practice and knowledge. So it is visualised that at least one installer working for competent organisations in each gang will demonstrate they have the correct up-to-date knowledge required within the role related to current industry codes of practice, standards and regulations, and that they can demonstrate sector-specific fire safety, technical and behavioural training has been obtained and maintained through CPD, all in line with approved sector-specific training standards and approved outcomes. Proof of competence in line with agreed occupational standards through demonstration of knowledge, practical skills, experience and behaviours linked to role functions is to be achieved, for example, VQs, apprenticeships or other approved routes. All achievements should be evidenced and stored on relevant industry cards. Evidence of reassessment to revalidate competence will also be required and removes the qualify once, practice for life culture and supports the drive for maintenance of skills. And finally, that all installers obtain standardised core fire safety training with evidence this has been understood and achieved, again to be maintained over time. And there is currently some developmental work going on around in this regard, but it does go without saying that with all the potential work to do, a phased and sensible approach will be required. Touching on the ability to deliver the right skills in the right place and at the right time, it is important to note, with all the work currently happening around competence requirements, development of standards, CPD modules and other, that we consider now the infrastructure required to deliver this across the construction industry. While some occupational areas will have this in place and operate a robust process and system, there are others that will be starting pretty much from the beginning. Therefore, a phased approach, cross-sector support and development of key skills is likely to be required in order for this work stream to be realised. There have been plenty of examples given to me and from my own experience where developmental work, resource and costs have been incurred to support skilling with very little uptake, taking some back to square one. The timing, therefore, of setting up infrastructure to deliver practical skills in some key areas is crucial, and conversations with educational establishments and others will be key in driving this forward. This goes without saying that support and combined push from all across the built environment will reflect positive outcomes. Over the past few years, and prior to the publication of Setting the Bar report, the roofing industry via the NFRC have been proactive in development of an accreditation programme that is designed to support professionalism and upskilling within the roofing sector. This is called ROOFCERT. Its purpose is to ensure that installation teams have the most up-to-date knowledge and skills through reassessment and revalidation periodically. ROOFCERT has to date asked in excess of 26,000 technical questions based on industry standards and will begin to use this information to support development of future CPD, plugging the gaps identified in skills and knowledge. ROOFCERT is currently aligned in many ways to the proposed direction of travel and will react accordingly when full realisation of requirements are understood and signed off. I'm not going to run through the full content of the scheme, but as you can see on the screen, there are a variety of elements contained within the process to achieve full accredited status. The introduction of ROOFCERT has highlighted there are many highly skilled roofers operating within the sector, but there are also plenty of gaps that need to be mitigated for efficiency and quality improvements. ROOFCERT, like many future schemes in support of skills and knowledge maintenance, aim to close these gaps to provide additional assurance. And finally, I'd just like to note that the information presented today is of course not exhaustive of all committees, groups and industry and other views and opinions, and supportive information, other supportive information may be available. And some of the information provided today remains work in progress and therefore subject to change following the pilot work. Any questions or points raised that I might not be able to provide a full response to, I will take back to Working Group 2 to consider and where required, provide response. On that note, I would like to thank you all for taking the time to listen to me this afternoon and hand back over to the panel. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Richard. Much appreciated. Lots of interesting things there. Richard, if I can just ask you to stop sharing your screen now.
Certainly.
That's great. Thank you. And we're going to pass over now to Nigel Blacklock for his presentation. So Nigel, over to you.
Thank you. So, so can you see that okay?
I can see it perfectly and hear you well too. So
Okay, thank you.
good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So basically, this afternoon, I'm going to talk about the Code for Construction Products Information. As Neil said, it's an auspicious day, which you'll see in one of my slides later on. What I'm going to do is give a little bit of background to why it came about and what's been happening in the last year or two, and what's likely to go forward from the perspective of a roofing manufacturer. It is very relevant to the topic of the presentation today of improving competence and construction quality, and hopefully you'll see that by the end of the presentation. Sorry, my screen's not advancing.
Nigel, try your right key on your arrow key. That might work. That worked for me.
No, that's not. Let me just come out again. All right, and right, we're on. Thank you. So basically, one of the key things that started this was what now more well known as the Hackett report, which was building a safer future report that was published back in 2018. And obviously this came from the terrible disaster at Grenfell. And one of the parts in the report in chapter 7, it specifically pointed out some shortcomings to do with product information. Of course, there was lots of other shortcomings that I identified, but we're going to just hone in on product information. So after that, basically, the government asked the MBS to canvass industry on this topic, and they did some initial fact-finding. And basically, the Construction Products Association, who better to represent the product manufacturers, took it forward, and they created the Marketing Integrity Group, the MIG. And they consulted with stakeholders all over the construction industry, manufacturers to constructors and trade bodies, etc. And that took over 2 years, and that culminated in the code, which was actually released for comment at the beginning of this year. So just this general stats, as CPA really were the stakeholder taking this forward. And one of the key points here that I would highlight here is the word marketed. So this isn't so much about what the technical content is about, it's actually about how it is marketed by manufacturers. And in Dame Judith's review, she looked particularly in the areas of testing, information, and marketing. And so we're going to be talking about here information and marketing, although Paul Morell is currently looking also at the whole testing industry, which is partly also tied in with Brexit. So what was found was in the research was that there was a need for a level playing field, and the information that people were using as manufacturers needed to be reliable. And so basically they came up with 5 challenges, the acid test as it's become known. And these 5 points are that the information should be clear, accurate, up to date, accessible, and unambiguous. All of which you would perhaps be looking at your screen saying, yes, well, of course they would be, but obviously that isn't always the case. So basically in the consultation, which was based on a draft document of the code that was published in January, there was a request to all sorts of different groups, from providers to users, trade associations, And so keen were people to get back with their comments that they actually extended the period into Q2 as well. And the findings were published in August, quite a meaty document giving all the overview of people's responses. But I think to summarize it very briefly is that you would say that in the most part, it was very positive in support for the principles set out. But I think there were some levels of detail that still were to be ironed out. So not surprisingly, then people were asking, well, can we have some more detail on that? So as was mentioned, only this morning, this press release, so this is hot off the press, was made, which basically says this is now the actual code, which is made up of 11 elements and is based on the acid tests. This is what we're taking forward, and it also gives some guidance for manufacturers of how they may wish to register to get involved in being assessed. So basically, the Construction Products Association have done their job now, and they have handed over to an independent validating organization that is being called CCPI Limited. It's not for profit, and it's expert in governance and management, and they are charged with taking CCPI forward to launch. And so at the moment, they're running a number of pilot test cases with a number of construction manufacturers to proof test their systems and iron out some of the detail that is still required. Just a point of note here is the fact that the manufacturers will have to pay for the auditing, and that this will be annual. But it is at the moment not a compulsory code. So the actual code itself is made up, as I said, of 11 ways of working, and they're split into 4 sections. The 1 to 3 is information creation. Then we have core information, which is the main body. Then we have some associated information, and finally some support, and that keyword there, competence. So starting at the beginning there with number 1, and I'm going to try and relate this to how this might actually affect things from a manufacturer's point of view. So have in place a documented sign-off process. Well, basically, I suppose what we're saying is making sure you check the content. So for all I've said that this is principally about how things are marketed, you do have to, at some point, check your content. So this is making sure that the content is accurate. Then you would have in place a formal version control process. I suppose what we're saying here is making sure everything is up to date. It's nothing worse than seeing an old data sheet that's dated 2014 and finding out that actually it's still up to date. It'd probably be easier that it was updated every year or verified each year. But making sure you can rely on the details. And then very important point is not using misleading or ambiguous wording. And of course, marketing friends are past masters at using the English language to talk about materials, but they have to meet these requirements. And so a good example of this also would be maybe a quasi-technical one, is that something affects us every day at the moment from a roofing point of view is the fire performance of roofs, flat roofs. And just making the statement that a roofing or roofing systems are B-Roof T4 is actually slightly ambiguous, or certainly not accurate enough. There's more information needed for somebody to make an informed decision. So that's exactly what this is all about. Then we move into the core information areas. So we have the requirement for specific information about your claims. Now, if you have certification or you've got standards, well, then of course you'll refer to them, or you should refer to them, and making sure that you show your references, if you like. And then also, it may be that you have verifiable or information that is perhaps not to a certification or an industry standard. And again, if you're going to make such claims, you need in some way to be able to prove your claims. Another important point is making sure that the physical attributes, characteristics of your products are readily available. And the document that usually does this in most manufacturers is a product data sheet. But the product data sheet needs to be full and accurate. And then we have 7 is ensuring the product information is consistent with manufacturer supply products. What does this mean? Well, basically here is that many manufacturers actually don't always make all of their products. They could be made by third parties. And so you very much are responsible as the end provider to the market that the information is correct. So you need to make sure that who supplies you is updating you in time and in full. Then we come on to associated information. So publishing on your website, basically what we're saying here is how the product is going to be used. So there's lots of parts about how you would specify it for pricing, etc. But also there's an element here that's dealing with the handling, installation, maintenance, the ongoing use of the product. A very relevant topic here, especially for flat roofing. I think flat roofing is one of the areas that's notorious for the subject of guarantees and warranties. And I was actually in the working group on this area. And it's true to say that many parts of the industries, they don't even offer guarantees or very little. So roofing is quite an extreme from that. And therefore, it needs to be very careful in terms of what is covered. And so the suggestion was that industries like flat roofing should have template models that all manufacturers followed to give full and accurate information about what cover the guarantees gave. So utilizing a recognized format, perhaps. Then we have the last 2, which are support and competence. So it perhaps goes without saying that you should ensure that you have a helpline or some way that people can ask questions if they're looking on your website. But also there's a suggestion that this shouldn't be embedded too far away from where you're looking. So you should be no more than 2 clicks away from where getting that contact information. And the final point is the subject of competence. Having in place robust training programs for the people that convey the information. So yes, that means our sales force, that means our technical departments, anybody in the business that may be front facing, that may be asked to give opinion advice on our products. So it's all about improving competence, which of course fits in neatly with the topic for today's conversation. Now, what we've come to refer to in Bauder is our CCPI goggles, and so forgive me for the picture there, but it's just the one I always think of when people are looking through goggles. So we have actually started the process back in January. We saw that these 11 goals were something that were very doable. We probably were doing most of them already. We'd like to think so, but we went through the process of mapping what we were doing against those 11 rules, and we reviewed all our marketing information to ensure that it was consistent with the acid test. And of course, we found some gaps that we needed to improve on, and we're in that process using our CCPI goggles. And really just to summarize is the key point here, which is often forgotten, and I think many people often immediately think of this exercise as a technical exercise. And as I say, it is about the marketeers. And one of them is to be careful with the hyperbole. Another point is to show your sources. This sounds like good journalism, I think. And check your facts. Again, good journalism. And also making sure that you have competency. And another element that CCPI picks out is a culture within your business. So part of the verification processes of the business and its culture, top down in terms of safety culture with regard to, say, products. And as I mentioned earlier on, at the moment, this is seen as voluntary. The construction industry didn't necessarily come out so well from the Grenfell inquiry, and this is one of the activities that the industry are invited to take the lead with voluntarily. But of course, the sort of Damocles hangs there. If it is that it isn't taken up by many, then there's a likelihood that it will be more likely legislated for. So if you would like to read more around this subject, then there's a link here, which I will put this in the chat function, so you don't have to frantically make a note of it now. And that will allow you to get access to some of the documents to date. And just finally, if you want to go onto this link here, you will be able to get some additional resources and register for the delegate pack, which you can see some of the things that are included in that. And that's me finished. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Very interesting and timely presentation there. So thank you for that. And we are going to now move on to Alan to hear about some of the projects that Arup's been involved with. So Alan, if you'd like to unmute yourself and share your screen.
Yeah, thank you very much. If I can just check that this is sharing okay.
Sharing fine, and we can hear you fine as well. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'm Alan McIntosh, and I work for the Arup Facade Engineering team, and I'm currently based up in Glasgow. Just a very quick introduction to facade engineering. We're about 65 people in the UK, over 300 globally, sorry, and a very diverse team. The facade engineering has brought together engineers, architects, people like myself who came from the industry, building physics, materials, geometry specialists, and we've got a track record of dealing with all the different systems, bringing together all those skills and able to accommodate any project anywhere in the world. So within our facade engineering team and looking at our two projects today, we have a smaller team on existing buildings and heritage. It's a specialist team bringing together heritage specialists, conservation accredited architects, and we're forming part of the larger building retrofit within Arup, focusing on repurposing existing buildings rather than always looking at building new. So today, we're just going to talk about two of our most recent projects and looking at the quality and compliance. We've picked the Bauder collection. That is the youngest listed building in Scotland, and Lloyd's of London, which is the youngest listed building in England, for a nice symmetry. So the Bauder collection was originally constructed starting in 1978. It opened in 1983, and we've, as Arup, have been involved in the complete building envelope refurbishment. It's been closed for 3 years now, and it will reopen in March 2022. And on the right hand side, we have some of the images from the original construction. So one of the large elements was the flat roof within the Bauder. As we can see, it was stainless steel cladding laid on a completely flat surface, and as per the image on the left, it was prone to a lot of standing water, which in turn led to quite a lot of leaks throughout different galleries within the collection. Now, within the original design, when we stepped in to work with the client, we were looking at PIR insulation, which would be cut to falls within the existing footprint of the building. But around the time of the design development and the tender, there was a very high profile fire within the centre of Glasgow, and the client very quickly changed their requirements and wanted all combustible insulation removed from the project. This was from their requirements and from their insurers, and despite it being in line with building regulations at the time, this was an enhanced requirement. From there, we set out to have a look at what products and what systems could meet the requirement of enhanced fire performance while meeting the required thermal, the weatherproofing, and every other performance requirement set out. From there, we presented these to the client, and the decision in the end was foam glass, which would be cut to falls, and it was within the Bauder system. The advantage from this when we were looking at the products was a 1-point guarantee for all components within the roofing build-up. With existing buildings, and it will be the same on Lloyd's, which we'll see, we are constrained with what we can do. With the upstands and key interfaces, there is only so much improvement we can do in terms of performance of the building. But the key one on this was with the flat roof, the main point of the roof, just to keep the water out, and any improvement is for the best. And this is one from a couple of weeks ago, as we're starting to near completion, the introduction of PV panels as well to the flat roof areas. The second one is Lloyd's of London. This was started construction 1978 and opened 1986. And as mentioned before, it's the youngest listed building in England. Arup's involvement in Lloyd's goes back to the very original design. We were part of the design team working with Richard Rogers. And at the present moment, we are involved in helping to maintain the building and looking at inspections on a regular basis and ensuring that the building is always performing the best that it can. We have some of the images here of the waffle style flooring, which is being constructed throughout the full project, and some of it at the present moment. Lloyd's, from the very start, when it was originally designed, were prepared to go above and beyond what the regulations were at the time. And the original roof actually has foam glass within it. And it has just been over time. This is the original roof that was put down, and it was felt as part of the refurbishment works on other elements of the building, we should look at the roof as well. We carried out inspections for the client, undertook some testing, and presented options of how we could completely replace each roof on the building, both looking at how we could keep the heritage listing, which has a lot of key requirements. Every element within the roof build-up is part of the listing, down to the paving slabs, to the granite stone that's on some of the roofs, and a reflective roof surface on each of the towers. When we met the client, the requirement was that we kept the same build-up to achieve the same minimum performance. And from there, we presented the options. Again, foam glass being a key requirement in this. We engaged with Bauder on the client's behalf, that the preference was that we would look at a cut to falls foam glass insulation with a new Bauder bitumen membrane roof. And from there, Bauder came to site with us. We carried out site inspections to check the current condition of each individual roof, to record the as-built condition as well. And from there, we've been involved in the tender, appointing the contractor, reviewing the design, and at the present moment, we are on site carrying out site inspections. And a lot of this is revolving around the key interfaces, with every element of Lloyd's of London being listed, down to the curtain wall, to the copings, the cappings, all around. We specifically look at how those interfaces are being dealt with. We've got to ensure that the new roof and everything that's going down ties in to what is in place, without damaging or disturbing it or compromising the performance. We've looked at this from the design, and it was one of the key aspects we had to look at from the very start, was the requirement for that quality being met by the contractor, and on site we're ensuring that it is being installed to that point. And we just have some of the images here of the current installation underway. And that is it from myself. I'll pass back to the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan. Really interesting to see some of the changes and improvements that have been made on both of those projects there. Okay, Alan, if you, thank you. You've just stopped showing your screen, so I'm just going to go back into my screen. And we've just got time for some questions and answers. So as you may have seen, our panel, we've had some questions come in on the Q&A function within Zoom. Let me just check that you're all, okay, you're all there, unmuted. Right, so we've had quite a few questions. I know that some of them have been answered individually or during the course of these presentations, but I think it's probably worth just running through the ones that have been answered, just for the benefit of all of the attendees. So starting off with a question that went to Richard. The question was, how often will the revalidation of organisational competence be required? And Richard, I know you provided an answer, but perhaps you can just run us through the key points you made there.
Yeah, I got a bit keyboard happy there, Neil. I did see that you wanted to answer it live, but I certainly, yes, I get a bit keyboard happy. So typically, you know, this is viewed as being something that would be an annual process, but also something that needs to be based on risk and performance, of course. But to be very clear in this response, you know, work in this regard does remain ongoing, and each subsector will have a view. Okay, so working group 2 will be working on this with some key subsectors with a view to reply to response through a variety of reports. There is some subsectors, obviously, with schemes that are already in place under the 17065 standard, which will have scheme rules that already dictate how often and what type of reassessment is required. Okay, so that being whether it be a desktop or a full surveillance visit. But again, this is typically links back to performance and risk. And as I mentioned earlier on in my presentation, in one of the first slides, actually, what recommendation 1 in installer competence under working group 2 in the setting report specified was recommended that if there was nothing currently in place, that this needed to be defined and developed. So that therefore, in my view, provides opportunity in the future for those subsectors without any scheme currently in place or any mechanism of assurance or third-party certification to be part of a process whereby they support the development of something for their sector. And of course, this is something that's going to be in the making and take years to achieve, but certainly working group 2 have got a view in its key principles on how potential assurance can support that future development. So I'm sorry I haven't got a solid answer in terms of exactly what it would mean, but I think that's part and parcel for each subsector to decide, you know, in relation to key principles, what it would need upfront. So that's my answer to that one.
That's great. Thanks, Richard. We've actually got a couple of questions here about ROOFCERT, so we'll stay with you for a moment if we can. The first of which was, will ROOFCERT accreditation be virtual or digital first, or will some parts of the process need to be actioned in person?
No, so absolutely, ROOFCERT, in terms of supporting professionalisation in the roofing sector and provide upskilling, is not a complete virtual process. Contained within the ROOFCERT accreditation programme is a competency assessment, which, as I've sort of mentioned throughout my slides, consists of a vocational qualification, typically, you know, obtained in the on-site environment on live roofing works. There is development and continued development of an experienced worker route as well, which would bring individuals into an assessment environment in a training facility where they are assessed by a qualified assessor. There's also the knowledge testing process that's done up front, which is either done on premise, organisational premises and invigilated, or we do have a mechanism of doing that through virtual, through the screens, but also that's invigilated as well. So no, ROOFCERT is far from a virtual or digital process at this moment in time, and very much one of being designed to increase competency levels.
Okay, thank you, Richard. And just staying with you for one more, this was about ROOFCERT and how how easily can the process for accreditation under a scheme like ROOFCERT be taken and applied as a model to other construction disciplines where I guess perhaps accreditation isn't so well developed outside of the roofing sector? Do you have any thoughts on that one?
I absolutely do. I think one of the key outputs from the ROOFCERT accreditation program, in support from the Construction Industry Training Board, the CITB, is exactly that, to provide a blueprint about additional subsectors can potentially develop a scheme similar to ROOFCERT, but of course in relation to their own occupational areas. I think there's certain things that need to be considered. One, for instance, does that subsector have a current qualification that's relevant and fit for purpose, that's easily achievable, and an infrastructure to deliver? If they do, then that's a great way of demonstrating competence within that environment. Does it have a set of industry codes of practice or other materials that can be used in the development of knowledge testing, for instance, if that's part of the way the scheme would want to be developed? So I suppose in short, my answer to that is I don't want to say this is an easy process, but certainly the majority of what ROOFCERT has done is transferable over into other sectors in terms of the format. Obviously, the content then needs to be specific to that occupational area and the competence requirements that are approved by those industry standards. So, yeah, it's certainly something that's part and parcel of what we are looking to achieve overall in conjunction with the CITB.
Fantastic. Thanks, Richard. Well, we'll give you a break there and we'll move on to the CCPI code. So we've had a couple of questions on that too, which I guess, Nigel, you'd be best placed to answer. So first of all, read the CCPI code. Are there any sanctions for manufacturers if they break the code? Okay, so first thing is that at the minute it's this level of detail that is being finally worked through, but of course it will be that if it is that you're audited annually, there will need to be some guidance about what happens if between audits somebody brings the industry, I suppose, into disrepute. I suppose there could be minor transgressions that maybe could be seen as reasonable and major ones. So I'm sure that will be part of the final checking process. But as I've said, it's not actually intended to be launched as in the whole thing for manufacturers to start to be able to go through the accreditation process till towards the ends of the year. So we've got a few months for them to work on that. Okay, thank you. Another one about the CCPI code. While it's aimed at manufacturers, what's the hope of how contractors and clients will react? Yeah, so I suppose it is aimed at manufacturers because it's our product information, but the reality it's aimed at the industry, and therefore it's a really good question because obviously they will be encouraged to ask for that. Now, everybody has to be realistic in the fact that there are many very large businesses that may take some time to go through this process. It was reasonably guesstimated in the feedback that it might take a year for some businesses to do it. Just even within our own portfolio, it's quite complicated. You don't just apply, you apply as a company in the first instance, but then you have specific parts of your portfolio assessed as well. So you could choose not to have all of your portfolio or anywhere in between that. So we'll be working up to that. So somebody saying, I insist that you use CCPI from day one is probably not going to be realistic, but certainly could go with the intent. Okay, thank you. We've got another question here. Someone's asked, well, they've said that they keep their supplier's product information in their library. In this scenario, that the supplier changes the wording of their document, is there any requirement for that supplier to communicate any changes to all previous customers proactively? Again, that level of detail that I'm not sure of, but certainly I could feed that back. But I mean, just practically from our own point is the fact that if it is that somebody was looking at our website, then we would always look that is the place with the most up-to-date information. It may become difficult to always be able to make people aware of changes, but it's a question that I can take back. Okay, thank you. There's a general question, I guess, about technology here. So I don't know which of you would like to answer this one, but they've asked, are some of the issues around product information solvable with technology? Accurate specification information via BIM objects, etc. Yeah, so certainly BIM is one of the things that will help. So yes, is with your BIM models, etc. Then again, it's just the same. You would expect that the information that's in there
is accurate and up to date. But a lot of that is sort of like technical information, and remembering the code is about how it's marketed. So, but yes, technology would certainly look to have all the common information held in one place.
Okay, and there's another CCPI question here. So how does the CCPI code integrate with the forthcoming manufacturer's plain language guide from the IET, they've asked, which they think is published early October?
Yeah, I'm not so sure as to how they integrate, but obviously in the end, our view on it is the fact that it's all sound, good practice and common sense, and something that you'd want to be doing anyway. As to whether you're forced to do it or it's commercially you're encouraged to do it, but I believe that both methods are talking about stuff that we can all get behind in terms of trying to improve the situation for product information.
Okay, now we've had a couple of I guess they're more comments than questions here. One from Dixon AU saying thanks very much. So thank you to your panelists. We obviously appreciate the session there. So the other one from Francis, they've made the point to extend the capacity of building to interested institutions in Zambia, where competence for installers of roofs and maintenance companies is critical. So I don't know if anyone wants to offer a comment on that, but it's an interesting point. So thank you for that one. We've got a question for Alan. How did you keep the internal environment dry while re-roofing, and how were seals achieved between work phases? Night seals, sorry, achieved between work phases.
Yeah, so prior to any works being carried out, we had a few coordination meetings with the contractor, the building as well. Another key one in terms of the internal environment being dry was about sound, noise, interruption for the offices nearby. We have an agreement in terms of how they can only lift any existing roof that can be sealed at night. So if they strip off 100 square meters of roof, by the time they're finished that night, we have to have the primer down on the deck and the VCL layer placed onto the concrete deck by the time they finish that night. That ensures that the roof is dry, and we have a removable flashing which is put between the existing roof and the new VCL when it's on, so that nothing can get in underneath the existing roof while the new roof's going down, and they move that around each night to ensure that it's always in place.
Okay, thanks, Alan. We've just had one more question come in. Does anyone know what's happened to the Lead Sheet Association, and how has the void of their departure been filled or planned to be filled? Can anyone help us with that one?
I believe it goes by a different name now. It doesn't go by LSA anymore, but obviously the group of manufacturers exists to pull together. But I think it's more just what you have to look for it under now. It's not LSA.
Yeah, I think we can probably get back to our questioning on that one. So okay, well, thank you to all the attendees for the questions we've had there. I think that brings us to the end of the questions that have been submitted. So it just really remains for me to say thank you very much to our three panelists and presenters, Richard Miller, Nigel Blacklock and Alan McIntosh, and thank you also to Bauder and NFRC for supporting this session. Just to reiterate rather, that this webinar will be available on demand, as I mentioned at the beginning of the session, and you can also find news about our other upcoming digital events at digitalconstructionevents.com. For now, thank you very much to our attendees, and thank you to our panelists.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.